right, Tony. Hey, great to see you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Hey, you know what?
Like that commercial for the telephone, right? That was my fault. The mute button was hit, so once again, I am technically behind the ball here. I apologize.
No, that's okay. We always love your insight anyways, Tony. So kind of opening things up, going back to the Jacksonville Jaguars, one of the teams that are obviously beginning their search for their next head coach. What are some names that NFL fans and Jaguars fans should keep an eye on?
I think, first of all, when you talk about the Jaguars, you got to start with Trent Baalke, because last time I was on your show, we talked about whether or not right after Urban Meyer was fired, or right before, I think it was a day or two before Meyer was fired, actually, we talked about would Trevor Baalke, the general manager, survive? And in the past, he seems to weave his way through those minefields when everybody else in the organization is getting fired. And it looks like Baalke is going to remain with the Jaguars and be part of the team that picks the new head coach. Now, what I'm told as far as the Jaguars are concerned is they want a veteran. They want a guy who's going to come in and not only change the culture of the locker room, but change the culture of the franchise. They want an upstander, a guy that's got high character, a guy that's well-respected. That's why you're hearing the names of Caldwell and Peterson. It doesn't look like they want a newbie. So Byron Leftwich, it would be a shock if he is hired to coach the Jacksonville Jaguars. They want a guy who's been there before, who's going to command the respect of the players in the locker room. What I'm told the perfect scenario for the Jaguars is something that they are strongly looking at, is if the Denver Broncos fire Vic Fangio, they actually want to bring Fangio in as their defensive coordinator, because they feel they've got a lot of underachieving talent on defense that Fangio can light a fire underneath and get to play up to their level of ability. Then the head coach will be chosen based on who works the best with Vic Fangio. So they want Fangio as their defensive coordinator, as what I heard yesterday, and they want a veteran coach, a Caldwell, a Peterson, who would work well, obviously, with Trevor Lawrence when you look at his history of developing quarterbacks. And even though Lawrence has had an up and down season, no one believes anything other than the fact that he is a true franchise quarterback that, if coached properly, will carry that Jacksonville team, that Jacksonville offense moving forward.
And that's something that we've definitely talked about as well. When we talk about Trevor Lawrence, you need to bring in a guy who can come in, I think, and really kind of build around what he does well. And I think that having a Vic Fangio, if in fact that situation does pan out as a DC, would be a great move. Now, speaking of Vic Fangio, let's talk about the Denver Broncos here. If Fangio were to get fired by the Broncos after the season and end up as the Jacksonville Jaguars defensive coordinator, who could the Denver Broncos look to as their next potential head coach?
Yeah, I think first we got to say, if Denver somehow squeaks into the playoffs, slides into the playoffs, they're not going to fire Fangio. They're 7-8 right now. I think they got the Chargers and the Chiefs left on their schedule. So it's an uphill battle. First thing I'm told is there's no animus. There's no dislike between George Paton, the relatively new general manager, and Vic Fangio. But Fangio is a coach that Paton inherited. So if they don't make the playoffs, they go 7-9, 7-10. They're going to move on. The name that I'm hearing right now for the Denver Broncos is Dan Quinn, someone who turned down an interview for the Jacksonville Jaguars. Kind of coincidental. But Dan Quinn, who worked with Vic Fangio years ago in Miami, so they have a relationship working together, is the name that right now is being bandied about as a potential replacement for Vic Fangio if Fangio is in fact fired at the end of the season.
That is something to keep an eye on as well, especially considering where the Broncos have been defensively. They're the number one overall scoring defense in the NFL, but the offense has underperformed there. And as you mentioned, this is a coaching staff that George Paton has inherited. He does have a good relationship with Vic Fangio, but at the end of the day, it's about winning. It's about setting that standard, and George Paton would have a chance to get his own coaching staff, which would be huge here. Now, I want to shift things over to the Carolina Panthers, somebody who's had their head coach and obviously taking a look at Matt Rule. The season got off to a hot start for them, but it had not gone the way that they had hoped for since then. Is Matt Rule safe here in Carolina?
I'm told they're going to give him at least one more year. There's going to be a lot of pressure put on. And I know that probably doesn't sit well with some Panther fans if you see their most recent reactions. But Rule's going to get one more year from what I'm told. There's going to be a lot of pressure applied. And when a lot of pressure is applied, what it usually means is they'll clean house of the assistant coaches. We already saw Joe Brady get dumped about 3 weeks ago. I would expect more coaches to be fired at the end of the season. Rule stays for another year, but as many people say, unless he gets his quarterback, it's probably going to be the same thing in 2022 for the Panthers, because obviously the Sam Darnold trade has not panned out for the team.
Well, and that's something to look at as well. They were linked to, I know there were some discussions about Deshaun Watson at one point during this season here in terms of some trade discussions, something to monitor there. Obviously, they had to bring in Cam Newton, and they had PJ Walker there. So interesting enough there. But I want to take things now to the Houston Texans. We just mentioned Deshaun Watson, but some interesting dynamic here. Could they make a change just after one season and move on from David Culley? Is there any coaching candidates out there that would entice the organization to say, hey, you know what? It didn't work out this year. We're going to go a different direction.
Yeah, this was something I heard earlier this week, and it's one of those things you hear and you're like, nah, that's not going to happen. But the more I delved into it, the more calls I made, the more people are telling me very likely there's a very good chance that Culley is fired after 1 year of coaching the Houston Texans, and Nick Caserio brings in Josh McDaniel. That is the hot name as far as a replacement in Houston right now. Obviously, Caserio and McDaniel have had a long history at New England, where they won a lot of Super Bowl championships. They're very comfortable with one another. I think the question that people think that Josh Daniel will have to answer in his mind is Davis Mills the quarterback of the future? Can he work with Davis Mills to build a competitive and then championship franchise with the Houston Texans? Because there's no quarterback at the top of the draft worth taking. There's no quarterback really in the top 12 picks worth taking. You may have a quarterback go early, but that's a team's going to reach for him. So right now, the big rumor coming out of Houston is Culley could be gone after the year, and then Nick Caserio hires Josh McDaniel. And it's funny, we talked about the Carolina Panthers and then the Houston Texans. You kind of tipped it off. I mean, if the legal proceedings, if the investigation into Deshaun Watson kind of finishes itself and they get some sort of resolution, and we know what the future is for Deshaun Watson in the NFL, if there is a future for Deshaun Watson, or what the suspension may be if he's cleared of all, legal wrongdoings, expect the Carolina Panthers to go very hard for Deshaun Watson, because the owner, David Tepper, wanted him last year. Then you had all the entire situation with all the allegations and the investigation. If that is cleared up before the draft, even before the 2022 season, expect the Panthers to go hard, offer a lot to bring Deshaun Watson in. I think they feel it's a quarterback that will carry the franchise moving forward. From the area, big, put a lot of fannies in the seats. It really works well for both organizations.
Well, it's something to keep an eye on. Obviously, it'll be a whirlwind of an offseason there. But I want to shift our focus now to the New York Jets organization. Offensive lineman Makai Bechten. There's been a lot of questions about him throughout this season. I know you've touched on several times. Is there an update on the latest situation between Bechten and the Jets organization?
Yeah, it seems to have gone from bad to worse. If you remember the article I wrote, I believe it was the end of September, beginning of October, is the Jets were very down on Bechten. They were very disappointed in him. He was a guy that, as explained to me, taps out of plays, taps out of practice, doesn't work very hard, relies on his natural talent, and he's been injured. Now, the fact is he's not back on the field. I don't know that he's going to play this year. And from what I'm hearing, the coaching staff is done with Makai Bechten. Robert Saleh last week during a press conference kind of gave a hands off. We'll see what happens with Bechten moving forward. We'll see what happens with Bechten next year. The offensive coaches, from what I'm told and from what I've spoken with, want to move ahead with George Fant. They're done with Makai Bechten because Fant has really developed into a good left tackle, primarily because he's been able to stay at one position. In the past, whether it was with the Jets or the Seattle Seahawks, he's moved from left tackle to right tackle, back and forth. When he was put at left tackle and kept there, he's really developed at the position. And the coaches know what they're getting. They're getting a guy who comes to play every week. There is an interesting dynamic that will now play out with the New York Jets, because the coaches are not only down on Makai Bechten, they're also down on Denzel Mims, the first two players that Joe Douglas selected as general manager with the New York Jets. Bechten being a top 15 pick, Denzel Mims, they traded down the receiver. He's on his way out. You could have a battle there where the coaches say, we're done with these players. Let's get rid of them via trade or whatever, where Joe Douglas and the rest of the Jets front office are not going to be so open to getting rid of the first two guys that they selected when they were at the helm of the New York Jets.